All right. Hello again, adventures, and welcome to another exciting daily vlog. This is daily vlog number 214, I think. Somewhere in there. So, today, I have been wanting to make this video for a little bit, and things just kept getting in the way. So, today we are going to answer the question, what is a druid? So I do these videos as part of my daily vlog series every so often where I talk about, from a game design perspective, what makes certain classes difficult to design for, what makes certain classes easier to design for, and what really goes into what creates various classes. And I wanted to talk about the Druid for a couple of reasons. One, I started a new run in Diablo 4. Diablo 4, it's not a great game. It's not a horrible game. It's not a great game. The opening of the game, like the first two chapters, are great. Everything goes downhill from there. But the first time, this might be why I think it's not a great game. The first time I played through the story, I played it as a druid, and launch, druids were really, really underpowered. It blew my mind when I did a second playthrough and I did it as a necromancer, and I just rolled through everything with my army of skeletons. But I digress. So I was kind of getting into the druid there, and I have kind of a weird, complicated history with druids. When I first started playing World of Warcraft, on an account that may still exist, but got hacked years ago, and I was never able to get control of the account back. So my first World of Warcraft account that I was playing since vanilla may still exist, but I can't play it anymore. I have another account that I've played on since then, the few times that I've gone back to World of Warcraft. But when I first started playing World of Warcraft, the first character I created was a night elf druid. And it became my main character in just about every MMO I played that had a druid style characters. I would play a druid, and I love druids. And they are really interesting characters from a lore concept and from a game design concept. So today we're going to talk about druids, obviously. I'm going to drink some more. But to start off with, let's kind of discover the genesis of the druids. So first things off, druids are real. There were Celtic. There was a Celtic sect that called themselves the Druids in the Middle Ages. So it was a Celtic religious group, and they were somewhat akin to one of the flavors of modern Wiccan beliefs, where they were very very nature focused and very appreciative of the natural world in general. There was also a lot of sacrifices that were required to be made as part of the religion, but that gets completely lost to history and doesn't deal with any of the modern interpretations of druids that we deal with now. So way back in, I think it was 74, I have it open here. Scrolling. They showed up. They first showed up not as, you couldn't play as them, but druids were characters in the original Greyhawk supplement in 1975, and then they were presented as a player character class in the Eldritch Wizardry supplement in 1976. And the first version of druids was not what a lot of people consider druids. Now, I've looked, I've done everything I can to do the research, so I'm not 100% solid on the Eldritch Wizardry version of it. But I did actually look at the text for the AD&D First Edition, the basic D&D versions of the druids. And right from the beginning, they had this ability to change into animals. But in the very, very first one from 1976, I don't know if they had that because the kind of selling point for the druid then was they were halfway in between a magic user and a cleric. They got they shared most of the spell list of the cleric, but then they also got some more offensive themed spells from the magic user. And one of the interesting things about the first version of the druid was it actually gained spells faster than clerics or magic users. Clerics didn't get level 3 spells until level 5, which is how all full casters work nowadays. Druids actually got their first level 3 spells at 3rd level. So the original flavor of the druid was very, very casting focused. And effectively, they were kind of pitched as an offensive cleric style character where they could heal, but they also had the ability to kind of attack and do lots of cool things that clerics really didn't. Like the cleric spell list from original Dungeons and Dragons was much, much, much more keyed towards healing and support than it was from raining down hellfire or anything like that. As you can see with kind of modern, like 5th edition clerics, you can create a cleric that doesn't heal at all, and they're still unbelievably useful and powerful and great additions to the party. Old school clerics just weren't that. And so the druid was kind of the halfway point. Again, once you get to AD&D and the basic version of Dungeons and Dragons, then they start. I think at those they still had they still learned spells quicker. They also started being able to summon helpers, and eventually they would get things like the ability to summon elementals and other things like that. So they weren't just summoning little beast companions; they were summoning some pretty hefty stuff. So again, they were still very much an offensive style class, and now they had this shape changing ability, which we now know is wild shape. I think originally it was called shape changing, and that started to influence them as they went further. By 2nd edition, first of all, they clarify in 2nd edition that the druid class is only loosely patterned after historical druids. So they make very clear, hey, we're using their name, but most of this has nothing to do with actual Celtic druids. So 2nd edition, they get the same spell progression as clerics. And for the most part didn't change a whole lot other than they were now starting to move into the niche that they eventually start to fill. We get to 3rd edition. This is where things start getting where we start seeing the druid that we see literally everywhere else. Another thing that should be mentioned, original flavor of druid could only be the true neutral alignment. When we get to 3rd edition, one of the things that 3rd edition did across the board is they loosened up alignment restrictions. It used to be paladins could only be lawful good. 3rd edition changed that to where you could have, can't remember if 3rd edition was any lawful alignment or if they just opened it up to any alignment. I think it was any lawful. So you could have a lawful neutral or a lawful evil paladin, but they still had to be lawful. The druid was changed so that only one of they had to be on a neutral axis somewhere. So they could still be true neutral. They could also be neutral good, neutral evil, lawful neutral, or chaotic neutral. But one of the two axes had to be neutral. And They started leaning a little bit heavier into the animal side and the shape changing. I don't know how useful the shape changing ability for druids was in second edition. And like I said, the research I've done in first edition, basic, and OD&D, it really was not kind of a combat feat that they used it for. It was for doing other things for the most part. Third edition starts adding a lot more to that combat aspect. Third edition also gave them a companion. They could sacrifice a spell slot to just call a companion to help them. Very similar to how we have the Beastmaster Ranger now. Druids were technically better pet classes in third edition than Rangers were. And yeah, they started really getting into shape changing, especially when we got to 3.5, because in third edition they were only allowed one animal form that they could turn into. So when you chose your druid, you got your animal form. That was it. 3.5 they started letting them kind of choose their animal form at will, and they introduced the ability for druids to turn into elementals, which is a really popular option for moon druids in 5th edition. By the time we get to 4th edition, the shape-changing aspect starts to become the definitive version of the druid. When you built a druid, druid has actually got 3 at-will attack powers instead of 2 at character creation, but 2 of those attack power, or at least 1 up to 2 of those attack powers had to have what was called the beast form keyword, which basically meant this is an attack that you can only make when you are in your beast form. And they all had a at-will power called wild shape, so they could just, whenever they wanted, there was no real limitations on it, they could just change into a beast form. And that's kind of the version of the druid that we saw in the Dungeons and Dragons movie. That's the flavor of druid that we have seen over and over and over again in video games ever since then. You know, druids are, they're the spellcaster that can also turn into animals. And their animal forms are a big part of how they play. And then we get to 5th edition, the 2 versions of the druid in the player's handbook are the Circle of the Moon Druid, which is by far the most popular choice, which gave you the combat wild shape and all those cool things you could do with that. Eventually you could turn into an elemental, and combining it with a few of the concentration spells that druids had access to could turn you into a powerhouse. I think one of my favorite versions of druid combinations was they would take, I think it was Sunbeam or something. It's a spell in 5th edition that allows you to concentrate, and then on every turn you can just shoot this beam of light from your hand. And so a really, really common combo we would see, we called it Iron Man, was you would cast that spell, shape change into an earth elemental, and then you would just walk around kind of gliding through the ground, popping up and shooting these repulsor rays at people. And it was super, super fun. And then the other one was the Circle of the Land Druid, which was the caster form of the Druid, but they still had wild shape, but it was still a core part of the class. So when we're talking about Druids, and once we get out of Dungeons and Dragons, the spellcasting part always exists. Like if we look at the World of Warcraft Druid, one of the 3 talent specializations from Vanilla WoW was I called it Moonkin, a balance. That was called. It was a balanced druid. We always called it Moonkin because they could change into an owlbear. They call them Moonkin. They're owlbears. So you could transform into a Moonkin, but it was mostly a spellcasting. The other 2 talent specs, or the other 3 eventually, were the bear form, which is the tank version of the druid, the cat form, which was the rogue version of the druid, and then tree form, which was the healer version of the druid. I played Moonkin and Tree Druid. for most of my time playing a druid, because moonkins, when I was playing, moonkins didn't get invited to raid because they weren't mages, and mages got invited to raid, but only if you were either a fire or frost mage. Arcane mages never got invited to raiding. So if I wanted to do raiding and stuff like that, I had to be a life druid, which wasn't as good as a priest, but it was still decent. And then when we look at like every other version, like we look at the Diablo 2 and the Diablo 4 version of the druid, they have spellcasting aspects, but the reason I played the druid in Diablo 4 was I want to change into animals and kill things. In Diablo 2, one of the trees was transformations. That's what a lot of people think about when they think of a druid. I mean, look at the Dungeons and Dragons movie. The druid character in there very rarely uses her magic. The vast majority of things that she does is through her wild shaping or her beast shaping abilities. That's what people think about when they think about a druid. They don't think about a nature-based spellcaster. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that there are nature clerics now. And they have been around for quite some time. So if you want to be a non-arcane spellcaster, nature-based cleric tends to make a little bit more sense in most people's heads, because in their head, druid is the animal thing. So when we're talking about kind of the class fantasy of someone playing a druid, one of the most essential aspects of creating and designing a druid style character is they have to be intrinsically linked to nature. Whether you want to try and do both the spellcasting druid and the animal form druid, or if you just want to stick to the more animal form druid, they have to be heavily connected to nature, and all of their abilities have to have some kind of connection to nature. Your spells have to have nature aspects. It feels really weird for a druid to cast fireball just randomly, because a lot of people think of fire and they think of it like burning forests down and stuff like that. So changing things to, instead of just casting a fire, we go, I have the wildfire spell. So it has that nature hint to it. And there's in 5th edition, there's a wildfire druid subclass. It's actually super fun. But you want to have a lot of nature based stuff. To the point where if you are doing kind of different styles of magic, you have your arcane magic, which is what wizards and those style of casters use. You have your divine magic, which is what clerics and those style characters. And then druids either get lumped into the divine magic category because there will invariably be a goddess of nature. And so they'll go, well, it's divine magic, but is nature divine magic? Or what's become increasingly more popular is there's just an entire kind of branch of magic that's just nature magic. So yeah, someone playing a druid, they want that connection to the wild. They want that. And then the other thing that I'm going to say, the majority, I'm not going to say every single person that plays a druid is looking for this. I'm going to say the majority of them, more than 50%, want the ability to turn into cool animals to do cool animal shit. Like, you have to have some kind of shape changing system built in. And that's where problems can arise, because creating a nature-based magic system, not particularly difficult. If you already have a magic system built in, creating a bunch of nature-based spells is quite easily just take some spells from the cleric, take some spells from the wizard, and add some nature to the themes to them. Bam, you've got a druid spell list. You should already have a magic system built into the game. It won't be too difficult to do that. However, transformation systems is where things get difficult. And one of the really easy pitfalls to fall into, and 5th edition D&D fell into this beautifully, is the idea of, well, druids can turn into animals. So when you use this transformation ability, we're just going to give you an animal stat block. It's the same stat block that you fight when you're fighting these animals. You just get to use it as a player. And that creates some pretty big issues from a game design standpoint. Probably the biggest of which is monsters in general. When you are designing monsters and stuff like that, you are not designing them to exist throughout a campaign. They're only designed to exist for a single combat encounter. So they will generally have a lot of abilities that, if you could use them multiple times a day, would become very broken very, very quickly. But because they're only designed to exist for a single combat encounter, it doesn't matter. You can just make them a little bit more powerful. Now, when you give a player the ability to either a limited number of times or an unlimited number of times, depending on how you want to do it, just take a stat block and replace their character sheet with a monster stat block, you start running into balance issues. And that's one of the reasons why in 5th edition they give a challenge rating limit. And one of the things that did, especially for early 5th edition, was it messed with people's power fantasy for, or class fantasy for the Druid, because they went, oh, cool, I want to be able to like recreate my World of Warcraft character where I just spend the entire time in cat form killing everything. And then they would try to do that, and because of the challenge rating limitation, none of the creatures that they could turn into were very dangerous from a damage perspective. Like for the most part, you could turn into a bear, which could do some damage, but it really was outclassed even by just your cantrip abilities. If you were looking just for 100% pure damage, you just really couldn't do it as a moon druid. So the other problem that it creates is monsters are intentionally designed to be significantly more simplistic than a player character. Player characters are supposed to have a lot of different options available to them that allows them to solve problems in a lot of different ways. Monster stat blocks aren't. They're not designed to do that. They're generally designed to do one particular thing pretty well and maybe one other thing kind of well. And that's it. So when you're designing a druid type character, if your solution to the wild shape or the shape changing question is, well, we're just going to give them monster stat blocks, you really are making it not fun to play a druid that's wild shaping, because while everyone else has all these different things that they can do, the druid is like, oh look, I have bite, oh, and I have multi-attack, but I'm not allowed to use multi-attack. Oh, so I can bite or I can claw. That's kind of cool. So I can either nom on them or I can give them a tickle. And that's it. Boy, is this boring. Whereas even the really simple, champion fighter is like, well, I'm going to go over here and I'm going to charge in and I'm going to do this. And then, oh, look, I got a crit on a 19 because I'm just that good cool. And then I have my flaming sword here and I can do this with that. And when you're in wild shape, you don't get magic items. You don't really get to do anything. So that's one pitfall that you could come into when you're designing for a druid, is just giving them monster stat blocks is going to make playing a druid feel really, really limited. The secret to playing a druid in 5th edition was Moon Druid in 5th edition was not look for the thing that did the most damage. It was look for the monster that gave you the most other options to do. Like Giant Constrictor Snake was a really, really popular choice once people started to learn how to play the druid, simply because a Giant Constrictor Snake could auto-grapple and restrain enemies, which was a big deal. Restrained enemies got disadvantage on their attack rolls. Attack rolls against them got advantage, and they couldn't move. The Giant Constrictor Stake did not do a lot of damage, did not have a ton of hit points, but that was really useful. Giant Scorpions are the same way, where they could attack and then auto-grapple, things like that. There were other ones like, I think, Tigers. They had the ability to run and then pounce, which could knock targets prone, which could be very, very useful. That's how you really effectively play a Druid in 5th edition, though the more modern Druids, you don't quite have to do that anymore. Or the newer subclass of Druid. I guess this is really only applicable to the Moon Druid. That's how you played the Druid. And I think that's what you need to focus on when you are designing kind of a shape-changing system for a Druid-style character. So what I mean by that is the shape-changing, they want to be able to do things that they normally can't do. Again, if you haven't watched the Dungeons & Dragons movie, it is a delightfully fun movie. It is not an Oscar-winning movie in any way, shape, or form, but it is delightfully fun. I really, really hope beyond all hope that we get a sequel to it, because the characters themselves were really, really great. The actors were fantastic. I don't think, at least off the top of my head, I can't think of a single role where it was like, wow, that person just did not do very well. Everyone just really got into it and had a lot of fun with it. But when you watch the Druid in there, the Druid in there is not, turning into a bear and then just sitting there and attacking over and over and over again. They are constantly using different forms to do different things. Transform into a bird to fly away, and then they get shot, and they transform into a rat to scurry under a roll, and then they transform into a deer to be able to hop around and get through. By the way, guys, if you didn't know this, deer can jump crazy high. Like they can jump like 10 or 15 feet. It's nonsense. They're like cats, but bigger. And also, deer can be very, very dangerous, specifically bucks, because those antlers that people like to mount up, they're very, very sharp, and bucks use them to fight other bucks and to fight off predators. If you get gored by a buck, you have serious, serious problems, like death kind of problems. So never underestimate the value of being able to turn into Bambi. But that's the kind of things that player wants. They don't want to go, oh, look, now I'm a fighter. Oh, look, now I'm a rogue. Oh, look, because if they wanted to play those, they would. And there is something to be said. And again, that's basically how, at least the early version of the Druid, that's how it worked in World of Warcraft. Was you had your tank form and you had very similar abilities to a warrior. You just weren't as good. You didn't have as many abilities. And then you could transform into... You even used the rage mechanic that warriors had. Warriors, in order to use their ability, every time they use certain attacks, they would gain rage. And they would spend rage to do their special abilities. Bear Druids had the exact same mechanic. They would attack, build up rage, and then use their rage to do their more powerful stuff. When they transformed to a cat, they actually got the rogue mechanic, where they had points of some sort. I can't remember what the points were called. They had these points that when they would attack, they'd build these up, and then they could spend them to do other cool rogue stuff. So don't get me wrong, there is something to be said in video games for the ability to be, well, now I'm a warrior, well, now I'm a rogue. You know, that idea of I wanted to play a lot of different roles. Master or Jack of all trades, master of none style thing. However, we already have a character that's kind of built like that in D&D, in the Bard, which we will do a video on the Bard sometime, maybe. Who knows, if people are still interested. But also, in a tabletop RPG, you really do need to specialize. You need to have your little niche where you are really good at what you do, that no one else can do. Because otherwise you just start feeling like you're not a part of the team. When there are certain instances where the team has to kind of really lean on you and your expertise, that makes you feel good. So the idea of just giving them, well, this is their fighter form, and this is their rogue form, and this is their wizard form. It's another really easy trope, because then all you have to do is take the mechanics that already exist there and, kind of create lesser versions of them for the druid, and then bing, bang, boom, you're done. But it doesn't create a very... sorry, there's a bug. It doesn't create a very satisfying experience for the druid player, because again, they just start feeling like, well, especially if one of those roles is already filled by someone, they basically start going, well, I just feel like I'm a worse version of the fighter that we already have. And yeah, sometimes it's nice to have two fighters. We don't have two fighters. We have a fighter and then kind of a half fighter thingy. And so that can become very frustrating. And so if you are going to go that route, it's really, really hard. As much as it sounds like it should be easy, it's really, really hard because you have to add things in there that makes it still feel unique. What I think is the best way to design a druid is that idea of, I'm going to use my shape-changing abilities to let me do things that I normally can't. In 4th edition, again, I am a 4th edition fanboy. You all know this. I love D&D 4th edition. It is my favorite version of D&D, even though I like 5th edition a lot. And I will admit, 5th edition, significantly easier for new players to get in. It's lasted a lot longer. It's a great system. 4th edition will always be my favorite. The 4th edition druid with the powers and everything like that, your wild shape was intentionally left vague so that you could flavor it however you wanted, which is kind of the name of the game for 4th edition. Flavor was a big deal in it. But you would have these powers that would describe a particular move that you could do. And it would be up to you to kind of flavor. It's like, oh, well, I'm turning into a bear, and then I'm running forward and chopping down and going, and stuff like that. But that was to me the most fun. So when you're building a druid, creating abilities or even just forms that have a distinct number of abilities. Like if you want to go like the pure freeform thing, you can basically do a kind of menu board style thing where it's like you can take these abilities and then your wild shape is your generic thing. You just have to explain how in your wild shape you're doing this. Like you can have this ability that allows you to fly, but in order for that to happen, your wild shape has to have the ability to fly, stuff like that. And so you basically create this a la carte menu of these are various abilities that you have, and you allow the druid to pick and choose the ones that they like to create their perfect form of druid. And the thing that you have to focus on with this a la carte menu is, again, you can't just have, well, here's the big damage move, and here's the tank move. You have to have unique aspects to it. Like this one can move through... when you move this, when you use this ability, you also gain the ability to move through enemy squares because you change into something very small and do something like that. Or this particular move allows you to move the target over here. Or this particular ability allows you to fly or go underwater or things like that. You know, so if you want to go that a la carte menu, it can't just be this is how much damage you did to do. You have to have other aspects. So again, the player can kind of flavor it to be like that D&D movie Druid, where they're just constantly kind of shifting throughout forms to create really interesting things. The other thing, which is a little bit more common when you're looking at Druids, is you have distinct forms that have a distinct purpose. You have a flight form. and it's designed for hypermobility in that. You have your kind of combat form that's designed to be able to fight. You have your underwater form, things like that. And again, it's very, very easy to fall into the trap of, okay, well, this is the combat form, so let's just make him like a combat fighter or something like that. You do still need to focus on, just because it's a Druid in combat form, they need to be able to do something different. It needs to feel like, well, yes, I'm using this as my combat form, but I should be able to do something that the fighter can't, because the fighter is not a bear. And bears have abilities that humans don't. Or the gorilla. Really good example of this. There was a book series in the 90s, which eventually turned into a TV series, which was one of the first roles that Sean Ashmore ever had. But the book series is called Animorphs. And basically it was about these kids that took a shortcut one night through a construction site, and while they were there, an alien from space landed and gifted them the ability to absorb the DNA of animals and morph into them whenever they wanted. And they had to fight this intergalactic war that the rest of the human population had no idea was going on. It was a nonsense book series that I didn't realize until I was much older just how inappropriate some of the things happened. Like in the 6th book, the enemies that they're fighting are called the Yerks. And what Yerks are is they're little slugs that go through your ear canal and wrap themselves around your brain and take over your body. They're parasites that take over your body. Invasion of the Body Snatchers style thing. However, their one limitation is they have to leave their host a minimum. The lights just flickered. That bothers me. They have to leave their host a minimum of once every 3 days to absorb the Cadrona rays, which mimic the light from their home planet. If they don't, they starve to death. So it was either the 5th or the 6th book. One of the kids accidentally gets taken over by a Yerk. And effectively what they have to do is they have to starve this Yerk to death. And they go into pretty grim details about how they do that. And like, it is a really, really dark book series. Anyway, and it's written for children, and I loved it. I read almost the whole series. It's great. Anyway, the thing that, effectively, the Animorphs were a bunch of druids. And the thing that they all learned is they would intentionally go out and find new morph forms that would allow them to do different things. And each one of them had a combat form. And each one was different. It wasn't like they all just went and got the exact same thing. They each had something different. And they played up those differences a lot. Like Marco, my favorite character. Well, it was either Marco and Tobias are my 2 favorite characters. Marco's combat form was a gorilla. It was a silverback gorilla. And because of that, Marco was really the only person that, while they were morphed, because they couldn't unmorph while they were in combat or anything, because the Yerks had no idea they were kids. They thought that they were aliens. And if the Yerks find out that they're kids, they can target their parents and all that stuff. You know, the basic Power Rangers thing. You can't let everyone know. And so there's no way for them to demorph to do anything. So Marco was the only one that had opposable thumbs and fingers that for the most part could work things. Now, they were still gorilla hands, which are not nearly as dexterous and small as human hands, but it meant that he could do things that others. And silverback gorillas are unbelievably strong. They're crazy strong. And so they would lean into all the cool things, like he could climb, trees and stuff like that. Cassie's combat form was an African elephant. A lot of people, when they think of dangerous animals, they don't think about elephants. They're wrong. Elephants can be extremely dangerous, especially bull elephants. When they get really, really upset, those cool tusks, those are weapons. And those trunks that they can use to like paint pictures and that, they can also use them to rip entire trees out of the ground and smack people with them. Like they are remarkably strong creatures. And so a lot of times, they also have really strong skulls because they slam their heads into things every so often too. So a lot of times Cassie would kind of act as a battering ram. Or Jake and what was the other girl's name? Anyway, Jake and the other girl that I can't remember her name, but I adored her because she was romantically linked with Tobias, and I heavily identified with Tobias because he was the dork and the nerd that was the outcast of society. I was a dork and a nerd, and I was an outcast of society. Rachel, that was her name. Rachel had a lion form and Jake had a tiger form. And they're both big cats, but tigers are tree predators, whereas lions are more ground-based predators, and they use that to their advantage. So going back to the Druid conversation, if you are going to be developing a Druid, in order to avoid we're just going to give you monster stat blocks, each one of the transformations, the wild shapes that they can form, should have a purpose and should have something that it can do that none of the other player characters can do. A tiger can do things that a rogue can't. Despite the fact that, or a panther is what it is in World of Warcraft. Despite the fact that panther form or cat form is the same as a rogue, just a worse version of it in World of Warcraft, a panther can do things, despite the fact that it's a sneaky stalker type attack character, panther can do things that rogues can't. And you need to really lean into that. So, if you're creating, if you want to give them specific animals that they can choose from, it's going to take a lot of time and effort. But each one should have, this one has a special movement where it can climb up surfaces really, really well. And if it's above a target, it can come down and do a special attack like that. Because that's, a lot of times, that's how panthers and jaguars hunt, is they'll be up in a tree. And not only are they able to kind of pounce on their prey from trees, a jaguar can haul an entire fully grown antelope into a tree with it. So giving them the ability, like, you can grapple someone and then drag them up a wall with you. That makes being the panther form fun. Even if it doesn't do a ton of damage, like they're still out damaging the rogue, just the fact that you can grapple and drag someone up a wall or into a tree and then drop them or something, that is really, really cool. It's the same thing if you want to make a gorilla. Learn about what gorillas can do. No. Make things, make it a boxer style character that has incredible, because gorillas can box. They don't technically box, but they hit things with their fists really, really hard. They also have really well-developed jaw muscles, so biting and things like that too. Or even allowing a gorilla to be able to have limited use of weapons and the things like that could be something very, very cool. And obviously, first of all, gorillas remarkably fast. Going into, canine things, wolves and stuff like that. They have an incredibly strong sense of smell. They are pack animals, so they work really, really well with other creatures. These are all things, but quite literally, if you're going to be giving them stuff, don't just give them stat blocks of monsters, because that can get boring very, very quickly. Create unique abilities built around different forms. And you can limit the ability, like they do in 5th edition, by giving them a number of shape changes per day. You can limit it to connecting it to some other resource. If you're going to be mixing that spell casting shape-changing druid, maybe have them sacrifice spell slots in order to be able to transform, so that you don't have to come up with a completely a separate system. And then you also have to think about opportunity cost. You know, the idea of, well, if sacrificing a second level spell slot lets me turn into a wolf, is there ever going to be a reason where I want to cast a second level spell, or is it always going to be a better idea to turn into a wolf? Again, good game design gives you choices. Bad game design gives you right answers. So whatever you do, make sure that if you're going to hyper focus on them being a shape changer, then make everything about the shape changing. If you want them to kind of be half and half, you need to design them in a way where their shape change forms will solve a lot of problems, but then there are also going to be situations where their spell casting needs to solve the problems for them. I think that's one of the biggest problems with the 5th edition Druid, specifically the Moon Druid, is everyone focuses on the shape changing, which can be very, very cool. And when you do it well, can be very, very useful. But then also being a full spellcaster, you get this really strange opportunity cost issue, because once you get to higher levels, even when you have your elemental form, 7th and 8th level spells, and especially 9th level spells, are just always going to be better than whatever you're shape changing into. Like, there really isn't, unless you are out of those high level spell slots, your shape changing is always going to be worse. So that's the other thing from a game design perspective, is you need to have a way for these transformations to improve in some way. Whether it is, again, with the a la carte abilities thing, it's just, okay, first level abilities are this, second level abilities, third level, whatever. They just get progressively more powerful. That's a really simple thing to balance. If you're actually giving them different animal forms, either the animal forms themselves need to get upgraded as the druid levels up, or they have to have access to, basically, okay, at level 1 you have access to these various animal forms. You get to pick one of these forms. Level 2, level 3, and then you just get to pick more and more powerful ones. The problem with that is the level 1 animal forms start becoming less and less useful and never get used. So if you want to go that route, again, the more you focus on something other than this is how much damage it does, the more useful it's going to be throughout the lifetime of the campaign. Like, the ability to fly is always useful. From level 1 all the way up to level 20, you're always going to have a situation where the ability to fly is going to be useful. So if you have a first or a second level form that the main benefit of that form is it can fly, they're going to use that form all the way through level 20. Unless you get, an updated version that not only can fly, but can also, do shit tons of damage and breathe fire or something like that. Well, then they're never going to use that. So yeah, that's my ideas on, the game design pitfalls of designing a druid. I'm interested to hear what you guys think. First of all, do we have any druid mains out there, or people that just have played druids? Maybe that's not your favorite character, but you played them before. Love to hear your opinion on them, and I'd love to hear your opinion on what you feel makes a druid, and the things that you would like. Maybe you've never actually played a druid that really felt like a druid to because of the limitations built into the system. Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, is all for me today. I will see you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.